and there's a camping area and so on. I mean, this is not a place where you do terrorist training. So that's one of the places they went to. And Justice John Sproat, who convicted one of these juveniles in an Ontario court at the end of September, accepted that material as evidence of a serious training camp. He said, well, of course terrorists do things like rafting. And you know, I mean, rafting on the Aramasa River, I assure you, is an impossibility. So mole number one, his job basically was to create the appearance of a group. You can call this speculation if you like. So put square brackets around it. These are Keefer's speculations as to what was going on. To take them for expeditions in the country, which he subsequently represented as terrorist training camps. Now I think we have to give him some credit, because in the trial of the young man who was convicted, Mubin Sheikh, the chief crown witness, was insistent that this young man knew nothing of any terrorist intent. And here I think we need to contemplate the meaning of the corruption of Canadian law by anti-terrorism legislation, Bill C-36, etc. Because the evidence that the judge accepted flies in the face of traditional common law legal doctrine. The common law tells us that to secure a conviction, you need to have two things. You need to have the actus reum, which is the guilty act, that needs to have been done, and you need to have what's called mens rea, the intention, the guilty intention to do that act. In other words, if somebody does something that's a crime and it was purely accidental, we don't punish that as, you know, first-degree murder or whatever, right? So there's actus reum, mens rea. This young man was convicted by a court that effectively took that essential common law criterion of mens rea and threw it out the window. What he was guilty of, basically, is shoplifting. He shoplifted stuff that Mubin Sheikh told him the group needed for their camping expeditions. And Mubin Sheikh said, listen, we don't want to buy this stuff legally, right? We want to get it illegally. You go and, you know, steal some flashlights or whatever. I don't remember the details, but it was pretty harmless stuff. So this kid stole stuff at the instigation of a very highly paid government mole, who then in court says the kid knew nothing about any of the terrorist stuff that I am imputing to other members of this putative group. And he's convicted as a terrorist. Now that to me is blindingly stupid. How can we be so stupid? How can we permit our judges to be so stupid? How can we permit our parliamentarians to be so stupid? That boy's life is ruined, right? Now, another mole number two. Oh, by the way, Mubin Sheikh decided that he'd undersold himself. He came back last year and said to the RCMP, I want 2.4 million. In return for which, I will promise not to make any book contracts or movie contracts. And I'll stay off drugs. He promised three things. Mole number two was paid 4.1 million. And I think this may be what rankled with Mubin Sheikh, $4.1 million. Mole number two, who remains unidentified, Globe and Mail and Maclean's magazine know who he is, but he's under the witness protection program. He is an agricultural engineer whose job appears to have been to, now the timing here is interesting, because in the spring of 2006, Mubin Sheikh reported to his RCMP handlers that the group, by his account, was getting ready to do sort of explosive stuff. What does the RCMP do? Well, you'd think they might think of arresting people if they have clear evidence of a group that's planning to set off explosive detonations in Toronto in the very near future. What they do instead is to hire an agricultural engineer who can provide supplies of ammonium nitrate fertilizer for ammonium nitrate fuel oil bombs, Timothy McVeigh. This is part of the scripting, right? Homegrown terrorists, Timothy McVeigh type, make fuel oil bombs, make fertilizer fuel oil bombs. Mole number 2, according to Maclean's magazine, provided them, the group, with the credit cards necessary to make the purchase, as well as the stuff itself. Well, they never actually got the stuff. The RCMP, I think, provided them with a bag of something else and then swooped and arrested everybody. They also had a third mole. This came out only later. A third mole who apparently was the one who provided the initial idea. Let's make a fuel oil fertilizer bomb. So you have one mole that creates the group. You have another mole who provides the idea for the central crime they're going to be accused of. You have another mole who provides, the necessary stuff. At what cost to the Canadian taxpayer? 4.1 million to the agricultural engineer. We don't know how much to mole number 3. 377,000 to Move and Shake. A lot of money to his handlers and the various CSIS RCMP people who, time's up. Okay. I just want to say in conclusion a couple of things about issues of torture. One feature of that case is the mistreatment of the men who were arrested in the Canadian prison system. They were subjected to sleep deprivation torture, as was Omar Khadr in Guantanamo. They were subjected to abuse of other kinds, to beatings, to solitary confinement for very extended periods of time. Ontario's Solicitor General thinks that's quite okay. I think it's important to understand that there is a kind of equivalence involved here between a state that says the crisis we are facing is such as to require us to move from our normal legal regime into a state of exception. That's what happened in Nazi Germany, right, with the Reichstag fire. That's what's happened, in effect, with the Patriot Act in the United States. The United States has moved into what appears to be a permanent state of exception, in which the normal civil rights no longer function. And something similar has been happening in Canada. It's visible in the case of Karl Malaskowitz Blaze. It's visible in the case of the Toronto 18. It's visible in the case of the behavior of our security forces in relation to people like Meher Arar. Now, we have two correlated things, I think. We have what some political theorists refer to as a sovereign exception, in which the ruling power expresses its sovereignty through the very fact of not subjecting itself to the rules that it applies, the laws it applies to everyone else. Sovereignty consists of exempting the sovereign from the law that applies to everyone else, right? Where does that doctrine come from? It comes from the Nazi jurist Carl Schmitt and his book. Corresponding with that is the doctrine that goes actually right back to the European witch trials of the 16th and 17th century of defining certain crimes as a crimen exceptum, a crime that is so horrible that we do not apply our normal judicial categories to that crime. And that's clearly what the war on terror amounts to. It amounts to a parallel exemption of the sovereign power from the laws which it itself applies to everyone else, and a declaration that certain people, Muslims, are going to be judged as a different category. And the things we accuse them of are so horrific that we can't contemplate applying our normal judicial procedures to them. So what I'm suggesting then, in conclusion, is that we're facing not merely an engagement in a flagrantly illegal war and occupation about which we have been lied to consistently, but we are facing a systematic degradation of our charter rights, of our judicial system, and of our police system. Thanks.
Thank you, Professor Keefer.